I'm Idiotac, and this is my review of Shadow Warrior 2 for PC. The game retails for $40 and is brought to you by Flying Wild Hog and Devolver Digital. So what is the game? Well, apart from being the sequel to Shadow Warrior 1, or the 2013 edition of Shadow Warrior, it is also a very different game this time around. Shadow Warrior 1 was a callback to traditional FPS. It was a linear corridor shooter with melee combat. It was a great game. However, this game has significantly improved upon the formula, and it rivals the 2016 edition of Doom, which is very high praise because Doom 2016 edition was one of the best games I've played this year. Basically what they've done is they've taken the traditional FPS combat you might find in the previous game or games like Doom 2016 edition, and they've added Diablo-style ARPG progression mechanics, combined that with Warframe-style movement mechanics, and some of the loot drops and gun variety you might find in a game like Borderlands. It's one of the best FPS I've played all year, and it rivals Doom. It's amazing, and if all you want to know is whether or not you should buy this game, the answer is yes. Go buy it now, use my referral link for Green Man Gaming below, save yourself 20%, I get a 2% commission. Thanks for watching. For the rest of you, let's get into the review itself. So what's good about this game? Well, first up, performance. The game performs beautifully on my system. I'm running a GTX 980 and an i7 5820K. No performance problems whatsoever. I've been playing with a couple of other people. They also have not reported performance issues. So if you have a reasonable rig and you're worried about performance, don't be. It runs very well indeed. It has impressive visuals and environmental design. The lighting in the game is wonderful, and the pseudo-Japanese-Chinese mix combined with the demon stuff and the weird, crazy futuristic nonsense is very well realized. The art direction in the game is wonderful. As I said, very impressive lighting. Texture quality leaves a little to be desired in some areas, and some of the character models are a little hit and miss here and there, but overall, visuals are wonderful in this game. Next up, we have procedural level design. This is very Diablo-like. So in Diablo, you'll go to a certain area, it will be procedurally generated with a certain tile set, so it has a theme. For the story missions, there are some linear elements that are stitched into that procedural level design, but when you're just doing side quests and random missions, everything's procedurally generated, and so that adds a ton to the replay value. It also means exploring is fun and unique every time you play, and you'll encounter different enemies in different locations each time you play. That's great. It adds a ton of replay value. It makes the game feel fresh every time you play. Can't praise them enough for that. It's executed extremely well. Next up, enemy variety. So all of the enemies in the game, and there are quite a lot of enemies, all have a unique mechanic. They also have an elemental type. So in the game, you have lightning damage, fire damage, frost damage, toxic damage, etc., etc. The great thing about it is that the enemies tend to switch up what they have, especially when it comes to elite enemies. Elite enemies in the game are equivalent to yellow enemies in Diablo. They have specific resistances and vulnerabilities. So if you're maining a shotgun that does fire damage, you might come up against an elite enemy that is resistant to fire damage, and you'll have to switch to something else to try and deal with it in a more efficient way. So that system's great, tons of enemy variety there, very fun to engage in fights. Story boss fights are even more impressive than that because they have a ton of unique mechanics. They have phases, they have different abilities, kind of like World of Warcraft. You know, you fight a boss, once you get its health down to a certain amount, it transitions into the next phase, and they have a bunch of new mechanics and things for you to deal with. So story boss fights are very compelling as well, and they can be incredibly challenging. We have the core combat loop itself, which is the gun and sword mechanics. If you don't know, the sword mechanics work like this. You have 4 main abilities with your sword. You can parry, so when an enemy attacks you, you can parry that attack. It will stun lock them for a few seconds and allow you to get in there and do some damage. You can do a spin attack and do AoE damage to any enemies surrounding you. You can do a stab attack, which you can charge up and stab through enemies to do impressive damage. And you can fire a projectile with your sword as well. You can also just hack and slash with it. So they're the sort of core sword mechanics. Very enjoyable, and when combined with the gore system, which I'll talk about in a minute, it can result in some quite impressive moments. Okay, guns. There's a lot of fucking guns in this game. There are 70 unique weapons in this game. They all fall into categories. You have pistols, you have shotguns, you have sniper rifles, you have heavy assault weapons, you have rocket launchers, grenade launchers, swords. The list goes on and on. There are 70 weapons within those categories. They all behave in different ways, so you'll easily be able to find something that you love and then you can modify that with the systems I'll again talk about later. So the core combat loop basically involves this. Run around the level as fast as you can, blow holes in demons, blow holes in robots, blow holes in weird creatures and monsters, and beat the game. That's it, and it's incredibly fun. If you enjoyed Doom, you will love this. Simple as that. Magical abilities. So the game brings a couple of magical abilities back from the previous game. We have Healing Flame, we have Chi Blast, we have Vanish, we have Grip of Darkness, and we have Shadow Fury. So you have a mana bar essentially, and you can spend it on these various abilities. You have Healing Flame, which heals you obviously for a certain amount. You have Chi Blast, which basically blasts enemies back and knocks them over. You have Vanish, which allows you to go invisible for a period of time. You have Grip of Darkness, which basically throws spikes up into the air and impales enemies. And then you have Shadow Fury, which triggers a Berserker mode that lets you do extra damage for a short period. They're all really great, and they complement the core combat loop excellently. You combine the sword mechanics with all the gun mechanics, the gems, which I'll get into in a moment, and all these magical abilities, and in my opinion, the combat loop here far supersedes what was offered in Doom 2016. Next up, gore and damage. So you can blow off body parts, you can cut off heads, you can cut heads into pieces, you can shoot shotgun shells through people's chests and bore a hole in their chest, you can see through to the other side and shoot enemies through the hole in that guy's chest. If you like gore, if you like gibbs, if you like bloody damage systems, you will be impressed by what's on offer here. Next up, movement systems. So they've taken a page out of Warframe's book with movement. You have a dash and a double jump. The great thing is that you can dash, jump, dash again while in the air, and then jump to finish it off, and you can travel significant distance. There's no cooldown on this, you can constantly do it over and over again, and zip through levels at insane speed. You can also change direction while in midair, which is wonderful to flank enemies during boss fights. The movement system is fucking awesome. You take the movement system, you combine it with that core gunplay mechanic I was talking about before, and you have a wonderful gameplay experience on offer here. Let's talk about the progression systems available. So we have the obvious weapons. You've got tons and tons of weapons in the game. I've already spoken about that. But you have gems and skills. Now, they're not called gems, but I'm just calling them gems for the sake of ease. Basically, you earn gems. They have stats, so they might allow you to shoot twice, or they might allow you to hold two versions of the same gun and dual wield at the same time. They might split the projectile into several pieces. They might cause the projectile to explode. They might give you electricity damage, or they might increase your chi regeneration. They do tons and tons and tons of things. Basically, think of the stat system from Borderlands or Diablo or something like that, and you're able to slot these gems into weapons. So if you have a weapon, let's say a sword, you can put 3 gems into that sword. Depending on the gems you pick, you can create an entirely different gameplay experience for yourself compared to your friend, which is really fucking awesome, and it adds tons of replay value. Next up is skills. So you earn cards throughout the game, and they have various impacts. So you could, for example, increase the amount of XP you earn when you kill monsters. You could increase your chi regeneration. You could increase your health. You could increase the damage of a certain weapon attack, etc., etc. You invest skill points into this, so it's a very basic talent tree system, but there's enough variety on offer here, and it costs more and more to upgrade things to max level. So yeah, again, a little bit like Warframe, with the cards you get in Warframe and then you upgrade those cards to the highest level, kind of like Warframe again. So yeah, really good systems, add a ton of replay value, add a ton of progression mechanics to the game, which obviously adds to the longevity of the title. We have a crafting system as well, so if you get tons and tons of gems that are useless to you because they're low level, you can craft them into better items, so that's a nice feature to see as well. Overall, we have a wonderful experience here. It has a ton of replay value, and if that wasn't enough, it has 4-player co-op. Well, up to 4 players, you can play with 2 or 3, obviously, and you can select from multiple difficulty settings. In my opinion, this game kind of destroys Doom in terms of gameplay. It has 4-player co-op, it has a great progression system, the movement system is better than Doom, so yeah, if you like Doom and you like ARPG mechanics, as I said, go buy the game. But before we finish the review, let's talk about what's bad about this game, because there are a few things wrong with it. So, first up, claustrophobic weapon and gun models. Now, you can change the FOV in this game, and it does get pretty extreme, it's very generous. But the weapon and gun models themselves don't scale with that. So no matter what you do, you're going to have these big, chunky gun models in your face, And I would really have appreciated it if they'd given us a slider to reduce the size of those models, because it does get in the way and it does prevent some situational awareness. There's also a ton of particle effects in this game, a ton, and it can make seeing what's exactly going on the screen right now really hard, especially if you're playing in melee. All of this stuff applies more to melee because you've got big models, you've got tons of particle effects, you're standing next to a boss that's like 3 times bigger than you, and you can't really see anything else that's happening in the game. Poor situational awareness is a big problem in this game, and the particle effects, the gun models, and the melee combat really sort of all come together to create this critical mass, so to speak, of just not being able to see what the fuck is going on. And it can get frustrating. Now, you can get used to it over time, but parrying someone who's shooting like 1,000 particles in your face can get tricky. So it would be nice, in my opinion, if they would give us a slider to reduce the gun model size, if they could give us a slider to reduce the number of particle effects on screen, just so we can see what's going on better. I think that would really help with the melee combat especially. Next up, poor character models. Now, while the game overall looks beautiful, the character models are low poly, low texture, and they don't look great. They don't look great, and you will be interacting with them a decent amount throughout the story. Now, you can skip cutscenes, and I did a lot once I got further into the game, but they don't look great, and they kind of bring the overall presentation down a notch. There is also some low resolution textures in certain areas. If you get up close to rocks and fences and things like that, you will start to see some texture problems. It would be nice if in the future they could release a high definition texture pack for PC. That would be great. Another problem I had, again just a nitpick, is that the anti-aliasing in the game is pretty poor. We have temporal anti-aliasing only, which means that the screen often looks very blurry and it doesn't do a huge amount to actually deal with the jaggies. What I would like to see here is some additional options. I haven't tried to force it outside of the game, and I don't have a particularly high resolution monitor. I'm only using 1080p here. So, I kind of have to deal with that because they didn't give me many options. However, if you're running a high-res monitor or you want to experiment with external applications, you can try and do that, but I review the product I'm given, and in this case, temporal anti-aliasing is the only thing available, and it's not a great solution. The voice acting is a bit hit and miss. Now, Wang, the main character, is funny, and his lines are well written and well delivered, but some of the other characters in the story are not so good, and they can be a little cringy at times and not well performed, so the voice acting is hit and miss. There are some UI problems. The menus themselves are easy enough to navigate. Swapping in and out certain gems can be a tiny bit of a pain in the ass, but you do get used to it. And the map system in the game, you get a little mini map in the right hand corner. It would be cool if when I pressed the M key, it didn't just give me a bigger version of that map, but instead gave me an actual map of the zone so I could find out where I haven't been and make sure I fully explore an area before moving on. When I play something like Diablo, I like to 100% the zone I'm in and make sure I've found all the chests and magical items and whatever else, so it'd be cool if we could have a proper map to go along with it. The soundtrack, while nice, lacks variety. When you're in combat, you'll hear the same song over and over again, and when you're out of combat, you get some ambient, Asian-themed, Japanese-themed, Chinese-themed music to go along with it, and it's all well done, but there's not a lot of it, and you will hear the same tracks repeat over and over again. It's also sad to note that the best song in the game is in the menu itself, and not in the game. The story. This is probably the worst point when it comes to Shadow Warrior 2. It's hard to follow for someone who hasn't played the previous game, and for someone who has, it's still a little difficult to follow. The characters you're introduced to may not make sense to you if you haven't played the previous game, and it doesn't do a lot to fill you in on the backstory of the previous game either. That being said, the story is kind of superfluous. You don't need to pay attention to it. It's not the focus here. It can be funny, it can be entertaining at times, but for the most part, I kind of just ignored it and got on with the gameplay, which is the real star of the show when it comes to Shadow Warrior 2. But if you're looking for a great single-player story experience, you're not really going to get it here. The humor, finally, may not be for everyone. If you're not a fan of dick jokes, you may want to avoid this title. However, if you can tolerate them, I strongly encourage you to pick up the game, because it is a wonderful gameplay experience. But just be prepared to deal with lots and lots and lots of dick jokes. So, should you buy this game? The answer is yes. I don't really have any stipulations. If you like FPS, you should buy the game. If you like the idea of FPS combined with ARPG mechanics you might find in Diablo or Warframe, you should buy the game. If you like crude humor, you should buy the game. If you like a good-looking FPS, you should buy the game. You should just go buy the game. It's a really good game, and it's coming out at a really good price, $40 US is a wonderful price for a title like this, and you can play it with 4 of your friends. So go buy the game. It's a really, really good video game. I have very few complaints, and most of the complaints I do have can be patched out moving forward. The only major complaint I had was the story, and in a game like this, honestly, story is not the focus. The focus is putting holes in demons with shotguns. If you do want to pick up the game, please consider using my Green Man Gaming affiliate link. It will give me a small kickback. I get 2% commission. You get 20% off if you sign in. If you want to support me on Patreon, you can do so. You'll find a link in the description box below. And if you can't support me financially, you can do so by liking, sharing, and subscribing. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.